to the 6th Contract Express webinar. Today's topic will be on external dictionaries and clause libraries. During this session, we will focus on how to work with external dictionaries, best practice for suiting documents together, and how to go about building clause libraries. Over to you, Anna.
Thanks, Nick. Hi, everyone. Let's get started with having a look at external dictionaries. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so you can see what I'm doing. Okay. So external dictionaries you may already be familiar with, but they are a very powerful tool in Contract Express that lets you transfer variables and essentially the contents of your dictionary into a separate template. So 99% of the time, the way that we use them is in order to create what we call a master dictionary. And the benefit that you get out of having a master dictionary is that if you have other templates in your environment that have to reuse those same questions, you do not have to update each individual template. You can just update it into your what we call master template or master dictionary, sorry, and then refresh it in all of the subtemplates. So I'll run you through an example of that just briefly so you can see how that would be done. So here I have my first template, which I'm sure is something that you've seen in demos before, so I reckon it'll be easier to work with. And let's create a separate document that perhaps we want to use that same dictionary from, and we want to avoid having to manually make changes in two places. The way we would go about doing this is just by clicking the External Dictionary button, and then I have two options. I'll run through some of the differences between them in a second. But for now, I'm just going to click Without Questionnaire. And then in here, I'm going to go in and select my first template, which is in use. So let me close that up quickly. OK, so now you can see the template reference for what I've attached and the location where it's from. So now when I click Close in this new document I've created, I'm going to be able to see all of those variables from my first template appear here. And like I said, the benefit is that, as you can see here, for example, this jurisdiction question perhaps only has, like here, two options. If at some point in time this needs to be updated to be multiple options, let's go in to my first template. What I could quite easily do is in my top template, make that change. So if I go into the jurisdiction question, for example, let's add another jurisdiction. And once I click Save, I can come back to the document that I created. And you can see that it's now prompting me to refresh. And when I do that, overriding the local definitions, that change is going to appear there as well. So there's lots of different uses for external dictionaries. One of the main ones that we use is for building suites of templates, and that's what one of the big things we're going to be running through today. But before I do that, I wanted to run through some of those different uses and especially highlight the different setups that you need for them. So that's the kind of primary method that we see external dictionaries being used. Another one of the reasons, like 1% of the time, what you might want to do is simply copy and paste the dictionary over so that the definitions are not being picked up from the master dictionary. But this would happen at a time where you're starting to automate a new template and you're noticing that there's a lot of overlap in the questions, but they don't form part of a suite, or you don't actually want to have this master dictionary attached. All you want is to just transfer an outline of your question so that you can go back in and fiddle with it even further. And to do that, you would do the same thing that we've just done now, where we've attached it. But once you've attached it, you can simply detach and say, leave the local definitions, so that that little pencil that appeared there, I didn't notice it, but hopefully you could have seen that, will go away, and you are then free to edit your questions, but the actual structure of the dictionary is left in place for you to play with. So those are the two kind of main things that you can do with them. You can either leave them attached as an external dictionary or simply copy and paste effectively them over. Okay, so how do we choose the right option for us? What are the different ways that we can configure external dictionaries, and which one should we use? So the first thing that I want to point out is the difference between the file-based and server-based external dictionary. You can find this if you go to your Options tab in your Contract Express ribbon on the fourth one down below. Depending on your version, it might be one up or down. You can see that there's an option here to use a file-based external dictionary. So the difference between a file-based and what would be a server-based, if I unticked it, is that when you're prompted to select a template, it'll be picking up either from the server, if it's a server-based dictionary, so whatever you have uploaded on your site, or it'll be looking into the templates that you have saved on your laptop or on your local drive to pull through that external dictionary. So essentially, when you saw me attaching that external dictionary, I've got a file-based external dictionary, which means that any of the templates that I have saved on my local drive are available for me to use. If I was using a server-based external dictionary, then any templates available to me on my Contract Express account will be available for me to use that way. So when do we use one or the other? I would recommend always using the file-based external dictionary if you're the main or only person working on that dictionary, just because it saves you a little bit of time. Bear in mind that if you are using external dictionaries as like a master document, every time you make a change that you want to reflect in one of your subtemplates or something like that, you have to upload or save in the server that version of the template that you've changed in order to see those changes. So you will already know this, but when you have to upload a template onto Contract Express by clicking on the dust button and clicking upload, it takes a couple of seconds. Whereas if you have it saved on your local drive, it's as simple as just clicking the save button and it just saves you those couple extra seconds, which when you're working on a big suite or on something quite complex, it is appreciated. But do bear in mind that if you are multiple people working on that master template or master dictionary, whatever it might be, you will need to have it shared with each other. And in order to access the latest versions, in that case, I would recommend using a server-based dictionary. So it just depends on the particular case of whether you're working independently and can afford to just save those couple extra seconds by using your local drive, or if you need your colleagues to take a look at the definitions that you've given, then you might need to use a file-based, a server-based external dictionary. Okay, so that would be the first difference. I'm going to leave mine as is just because it's just smoother. More differences. So another one of the things that you can choose between, one of the options that you have in Contract Express, is if you click on the little arrow for attach, you get two options. You can either attach without the questionnaire or with the questionnaire, append questionnaire. The difference is without questionnaire, it's simply going to be pulling through the variable definitions that you've created and obviously all the variable names. Also, I didn't mention this earlier, but when you attach a dictionary, everything in the dictionary editor is pulled through. So any alerts and lookup tables that you've created there, or functions, anything like that, will also be pulled through. So without questionnaire simply means that your groups and pages will not appear. And append questionnaire means that they will appear and it'll organize your variables in the same way of the master dictionary. So when do you need to use one or the other? Again, it kind of depends on the particular case. If you're working in a suite of templates, and I'll go through this in my best practice points, I would recommend that you don't attach the questionnaire. This is just going to save you a little bit of mental gymnastics that you're going to have to do about how you organize your variables. This will obviously depend on the complexity of your suite, but generally, if you can avoid attaching the questionnaire to your subtemplates, it'll save you time when troubleshooting things like the order of the questions, or if you have an issue of relevancy and you're trying to find where that variable appears, it just makes it that little bit simpler if you only have your master dictionary determining the order of the pages in the groups and your subtemplates just feeding off of that one. When you will want to append the questionnaire is in the second scenario that I mentioned. If you're just copying and pasting the structure over, then you might want to do that. Or like I say, depending on how complex your suite is, you might actually benefit from having multiple subtemplates have their own variable structure. So it does just depend. Let's select that again. So I can show you what the detach options are. Okay, so for detach options, again, on the dropdown, you've got two options. You can detach removing the local definitions or leaving the local definitions. Removing the local definitions is going to delete the variables from that master template entirely. So it'll just wipe anything that's from that external dictionary. Detach leaving the local definitions will have the effect that I showed you earlier, where it detaches, it removes that link to the master dictionary, but it leaves all of the definitions and all of the variables behind for you to use. So it's kind of as if you were saying paste and then, disconnect the link between them. So when do you need to use one or the other? Again, kind of depends on the situation. I'll be seeing that a lot, but there's just so many different possibilities. Removing the local definitions, you'll need to do if you are looking to, like I say, completely wipe the definitions of your dictionary, then you need to remove local definitions. If you're trying to, if you're working with multiple dictionaries and the definitions need to stay, but you need to play around with which master dictionary perhaps they're coming from, then you'll be wanting to leave the local definitions behind so that you don't lose them. Okay. And then you have refresh, which also has two options. We get asked about these frequently, I think, in trainings. You can refresh preserving the local definitions or refresh overriding the local definitions. And refresh, what it essentially does is that when you make a change, like you saw earlier in your master template, your subtemplates will show that you're missing the latest version, the latest changes of that template. So refresh, updates those changes. So preserving local definitions means that it's going to refresh the time, like essentially the version that you uploaded, but it's not going to show those changes. So if you add any new variables, that will appear. But if you've made a change to an existing variable, then the previous version will stay put and it won't be changed by the new version. I hope that makes sense. So any new variables that you've added in the master dictionary will be added into your subtemplate when you're refreshing, preserving local definitions. But if you've made a change to an existing variable, then that change will not be reflected in your subtemplate when you make that refresh. So that's preserving. I rarely use preserving. Again, 99% of the time, you'll probably be using refresh overriding local definitions. So what this allows you to do is ensure that the latest version of your master template is updated in your subtemplate. So you have the absolute latest version of the definitions that you've given in your master template in all of your subtemplates. Okay. That's about it, I reckon, for the definitions. Or the options rather. A couple of best practice points that I'll come back to when we talk about suites of templates just coming up is that the best way that we recommend of working with a master template or working with, especially in a suite, is that wherever possible, add your variables into the master template and then attach that or refresh that dictionary in your subtemplate where you need to use them. It's a little bit counterintuitive at first because you're so used to, automating and creating fields and spans in the actual template that you're working with. So let's say that was this one, but it does help troubleshoot and fix quite a lot of the common issues that we see if instead of creating new variables that appear in your subtemplate directly into that dictionary editor, if you create them instead into your master template, then you can ensure that this one is always the governing and latest version of your variables. So again, it depends on how complex your suite is. You can obviously work different ways, but just especially if you're starting out, that is definitely what we would recommend. And then another quick point to mention as well is don't forget to actually refresh your dictionaries. So often we'll see, people trying to actually follow best practices and they'll create variables in the master dictionary, but something is appearing as wrong in the questionnaire. It's always worth, it's the first thing that we'll check in the services team as well is the template that's using the an external dictionary, does it have the latest version of that external dictionary? Have you refreshed it? And if it's not the case, then go ahead and do that so that you can ensure that everything is up to date. And then that'll hopefully solve some of the issues. And if not, then you can, go ahead and get started with the troubleshooting process. Okie doke. So that is everything on external dictionaries. Just to point out as well, we have a lot of really great articles on the knowledge base that go through this whole best practices in more detail. But I will continue touching on that topic as we go on to suites, which is hugely linked to external dictionaries because they kind of work hand in hand in some ways. So suites of templates, you may already have played with suites of templates, but essentially what they let you do is using just one questionnaire, you can generate multiple documents at the end. So this will be something like a transaction maybe that you have, the same data or the same questions that are being asked throughout. So like the client name, lots of information is shared throughout all of these documents. And you want to avoid having to ask those questions to the user multiple times. One of the best ways of doing this is, like I say, using a suite of documents. So let me show you an example of an existing suite that we have, just because it's really neat to show you how it works in case you haven't seen that before. So you'll see that the first questions that get asked is, which documents do you need to create? So I'm going to save these first three. And when I move on, I will start getting asked the questions that are relevant only to those documents. And if I open up the preview, you'll be able to see that the tabs that appear are for each of those documents. So this is essentially, a very neat example of what a suite of documents is. And at the end, again, you can see that there's 3 separate files to download at the end of your questionnaire, one for each of those attachments. So like I say, this is a very, very simple example of how it works. Let me show you what the master looks like. So this is what I would say is, like, again, very much following the best practices of what we would recommend for a suite of templates, which is having one master document that has all of the attached statements, making this the master dictionary, and then applying this master dictionary to each of the subtemplates that are using it. So in each of these templates that we're attaching, the court letter, cost letter, etc., the master dictionary that's applied is the instructions bundle master, and I'll be able to show you an example as well. So we go to the cost letter. You can see that the dictionary here is the instructions master. This is also on the knowledge base if you want to have an example to go by. But let's break it down a bit on how to build these. So I'm sure you already know this, but just for those of you who maybe haven't played around so much with suites of templates, there's 2 different statements that we consider to create suites. There's 2 different types. You have an attached statement, which looks like the ones that you're seeing up here, which you simply need to write the syntax attach template, and then in between single commas, the template reference of the template that you want to attach. The other example is, or the other type is include statements, which look the same, except instead of the command attach, you use include. So the difference between these 2 is that when you're attaching a template, you are creating a separate file to download for your user. So that's, when you saw those tabs, those are separate Word documents that you're creating for the user. Include, on the other hand, is going to be actually including the contents of another template inside the body of wherever it is that you're including them. So in this case, if I say include template, let's say cost letter as well, like so, then the body of whatever is inside my cost letter will be included at this point in this document, whereas attach creates a whole separate file. So kind of depends. We'll see when we go through banks of clauses in just a few minutes how we actually use include for those. But yeah, so it just depends on what you're trying to do. The only thing to kind of point out about the difference is that when you're using an attach statement, it doesn't matter where in your document you're placing it. So you can place them all at a time, at a page at the top of your master document, or all of them at the end. It really doesn't matter because wherever they appear, it won't show any text. So when this resolves, it'll go to nothing. It'll just appear as blank. So it doesn't matter where you place an attached statement. However, for include statements, wherever you place that include statement is where that body or that content of the template is going to appear. So yeah, just worth bearing in mind that for one, it will make a difference. Okay, so another, what I wanted to run through today is just showing you how to build one really kind of briefly, hopefully, but just because I think it helps to see the step-by-step process to better understand how it works. So let's say I have a master document, kind of like this one, but let's just go from scratch. And I'm just going to call it master document, or master template rather. What I would ideally do is have, well, it depends again on the scenario, but if we're kind of going by this kind of best practice style, I'm going to have just my attached statements appear here. So I wouldn't even have a title. I'm just going to leave this blank because all this is going to do is pull those templates together, but I don't need my user to ever see this template. So this is just going to have my attached statement, my attached statements. Okay, so then what I'd do is I'd simply place my attached statements here. So I'd say attach template, and then let's say subtemplate 1. And I'm going to say again, attach template, subtemplate 2. So these are going to be the two documents that I want my user to create from this suite. And then I'm going to go away and just open up two examples of what that might look like. That's going to be my subtemplate 1, and let's create a new one that is called subtemplate 2. Okay, I know these documents are blank, so it might be not the easiest thing to visualize, but hopefully you can see where I'm going with this, where if you already have those templates that are going to form part of a suite, imagine these subtemplates are them. And then your top template can be you can just open up a new blank document and place those attached statements here. What I would then recommend that you do is that all of the variables that you need to place inside your subtemplate 1 and your subtemplate 2, you go ahead and create them instead of in those documents, you create them directly inside of the master template, which this is what I was mentioning, can be a little bit counterintuitive at first. But the reason we do this is because let's imagine you have, maybe client name as a variable that you need to include in subtemplate 1. And that also needs to be used in subtemplate 2. If you are quite, precise with your naming convention, you can probably get away with just manually creating those variables twice. But more often than not, we see very frequently we have duplicate questions appear because by accident, the author will have called it name client instead of client name. And as we'll know, Contract Express identifies what the question is by the name of the variable. So as long as they match, it considers them to be the same question, but when they are different, then it becomes two separate questions, even if they intend to be, the same piece of information that you're asking. So to avoid a simple mistake like this, what we recommend is just go ahead, create everything in your master. I always say I have in one side of my screen, I'll have my master dictionary. And on the other side, I'll have the template that I'm working on. So let's say I'm working on subtemplate 2. And I'll see, okay, I need my client name to appear here. So I'm going to go ahead and create a variable, client name. I also maybe need a date variable. So I'm going to call it date. And let's just create a new variable 1 just to have something. I'm not going to be dragging and dropping them into my master, but what I will do is save my master document somewhere that I can use it. So I'm going to do maybe just on my desktop. If I can find my desktop. Here we go. And once that's saved, I can make that an external dictionary here. I'm going to say without questionnaire because, as I mentioned, this tends to solve quite a lot of, prevent quite a lot of simple mistakes. Oh, the news. I just need to close it. If you're not using OneDrive, you won't have the headache that I do of doing that. But if not, just close or you can get rid of the autosave as well. Okay, so now that I've attached it, I can go ahead and click close. And when I open up my dictionary editor, all of those variables are going to be available for me to use. Like so. Okay, and I will do the same thing for subtemplate 1. But I think you get the idea, so I maybe won't go through the whole thing. So that would be my recommendation. If you then realize that you've got an additional variable that you need to add that you haven't already, just go back to your master template, which in my case was just this one here, and create those variables as necessary. And then just go back and refresh. So new variable, save it, and then come back to your subtemplate that you were working on, refresh, overriding local definitions, and then that will become available for you to use. Okay, that would be, like I say, my recommendation of how to build a suite of templates if possible. The next thing you can do as well is, of course, you can create a question that allows you to select which of the documents you want to use. Very simply, that is just a multi-select question. In this case, it's called doc choice, and it has in the constraints each of those documents written down. So yeah, that would be the method that you use to select which documents. Okay, a couple of tips when working with suites of templates. Again, main one is always create your variables from the top template where possible. Second one that we've already mentioned, but I'll just highlight again, is if possible, try and not attach the dictionary with the questionnaire. So that means without the pages and the groups. This is a little bit tricky to explain. It's easier if you play around with it, you'll see what I mean. But essentially, when you have a mismatch in the relevance and you have different order of questions or different pages and groups in two templates, you can often get two pages appearing in your questionnaire, because since you have pages in both your master and your subtemplate, if there's questions that are relevant in both and there's a mismatch in the relevance of some kind, you will see both of them appear. So if possible, just attach without the questionnaire, and it'll save you that trouble of figuring out why you have two pages appearing. You know that no matter what, the only structure that you've given to your questions is always set in the master template. Another tip is always when testing, this is quite a simple one, so it might be really obvious to some of you, but just in case, when you're testing a suite of templates, let's say you've made some changes to the relevance of some sort, make sure that you're launching from the master template, even if the change that you've made has only been to the subtemplate. In the end, your users are going to be generating these documents from the top template. So you need to be launching from there in order to see what effect it's going to have. And then another one, again, this might be obvious to some of you, but it's worth mentioning. Make sure that you have the latest versions of your subtemplates uploaded onto the environment, like all of them. So all of your subtemplates are uploaded onto the environment in their latest versions before you go ahead and try to test your suite. So often we'll see, a change isn't showing up even though I've made it, and it's just maybe forgotten, especially when you have maybe like 70 attachments that you have to keep track of. So make sure remember that you can bulk upload templates as well. So make sure you do that as well. And then another top tip is that when you're working with a suite of templates, or when you're trying to share a suite of templates, it's not necessary to share the sub-templates with your users. As long as the top template is shared, the sub-templates only need to be made live in order for them to be available to users. If you make the sub-templates live, then they will appear as a separate questionnaire for your users to fill in, which you might not want. And especially if you are going by the suggestion of not putting in the order of pages and groups, they will get just default pages created in the questionnaire. So Yes, that's a lot of tips, but hopefully that will help. Just on troubleshooting, in case something does, some of the common mistakes that we see to help you work through them. If you are seeing duplicate questions, try and identify what that question is and which of your templates it's appearing in, and then notice whether the relevance is different in your master than it is in your, in multiple places, not in your master, in multiple places in your suite. So if it perhaps appears in 3 different subtemplates, notice whether there's a mismatch in the relevance. Because I don't know if I mentioned this before, but the relevance of your variables in a suite of documents has to be uniform. So you can't be repeating a variable in subtemplate number 1 and then only repeating it once, so not having it repeated at all, essentially, in subtemplate 2. If a variable is being repeated because it's one single questionnaire, it needs to be repeated throughout your suite. So you need to have that consistency in your relevance. If you're getting duplicate questions, the main thing to notice is what is the question about and where might you have made a mistake by accidentally creating a separate variable in your subtemplate. With the author, you can actually filter through. Now I can show you this because 8.7 just came out. You can filter through your variables to find just the ones that are from this on External Dictionary, So if I click on external, it'll show you the variables that are from an external dictionary. But if I tick it again, then it'll show you the ones that are local to this template. So that's something that you can do, again, to try and find where might I accidentally created a variable instead of using the definition from the master. If you are seeing default additional pages at the end of your questionnaire, that will generally be because, again, you've created a variable in your subtemplate and you've not accounted for it in your master. So if you go back to your master, check if that variable that's appearing in your default page exists there. And if it doesn't, then make sure you add it to your master dictionary and then again refresh your dictionary over to your subtemplate where it's being used. And that should fix the problem. Yes, and hopefully those tips are enough. It is difficult to pinpoint like a perfect formula to working with suites because it can just depend so much on what you're trying to achieve. But hopefully that gives you a good background. And of course, if you have any specific questions on your suite, don't hesitate to contact the support team. All right. So finally, I wanted to talk about building banks of clauses. So this is a really useful tool that you can use within Contract Express. And what it lets you do is you can have one whole template dedicated to standard, boilerplate clauses that you might be using in hundreds of your templates. And in a similar way to external dictionaries, when one of those clauses changes, you now no longer have to amend it in all of the contracts where it's being used. You can simply update it in one place, and then every next time that your user needs to create a contract, they'll have the updated version of that clause. So I'll show you how to build a bank of clauses and also how to use it in one of your templates. This is the example that I always use to showcase, the kind of best way of building a bank of clauses. And you will see that it's very basic. All it has is numbering. That's also optional depending on how you're using your bank of clauses. And then it has the content of the clauses. And you will notice if I open my markup, my paragraph marker, there is no other spaces or content in the whole rest of this document. All it is the clauses, all each of them individually highlighted or wrapped in their spans. And there's only one variable in this whole template. It's called clause select, and it has the constraints of each of those clauses, which, like I mentioned, wraps around each of them in a span. It's really important to mention the lack of spaces in your bank of clauses, because when you include one of these clauses, like I say, it includes all of the content of this template. So if you have a space, then it'll include the space. If you have paragraphs, it'll include the paragraphs. So you want your bank of clauses to have only the bare minimum that you need, which is just the clauses. Okay, So then there's two kind of main ways that I see bank of clauses being used, or that I can suggest to you. Probably the easier version of it is that, like you can see, because I've got my question clause select here, what I can do is, let's go to my first template since that's quite easy. And let's say I wanted to include a standard clause here. I would say include template, and then my template reference, which I know is bank of clauses. And then the next thing that I would do is just create a variable that matches the one in my bank of clauses, called, in my case, clause select, to give my user the option to select from that list of clauses. I could even make it multi-select here. Select the clauses. Okay, and in the constraints, same thing. I would just pick up each of those constraints that I've set and paste them into the document that I want to use it in. Okay, so now if I launch this template, you'll see that it's going to ask me to pull in. I didn't put it in a group, that's why it's appearing here, but I can select which clauses I want. And if I open up my preview, those will be added to my document as follows. It's worth mentioning here, again, one of the really important things when you're using a bank of clauses is that you need your bank to match the style of the rest of your templates that you plan to use it in. Otherwise, it doesn't do that automatically. So the numbering will follow along. So if we were to put that include statement underneath, and another paragraph here, it would have followed on from the list that it was in, but the styles won't. So you need to make sure that those match up first. Yes, that's essentially, so that's the first way that you can do it, is by simply creating a replica of that question in your bank of clauses. So clause select inside of the document that you want to be using it in. So in my first template. The other option, if you don't want to give your user the ability to select the clauses, you already know which one needs to be included in the template. What you can do is simply tell the system to include the template. And then specify the selection options that should have been selected from that bank of clauses. So for something like this, you would need your bank of clauses to be a single select variable, which I'm not sure mine is here. Yes, it is. And what you would say is include template bank of clauses, and then specify using the with operator what the clause select constraints should have been. So include the template bank of clauses with clause select as, and then in double quotes, say, for example, amendment. So I'm imagining that I don't have that selection option. And in this case, the effect will be just slightly different. Instead of letting my user select, I just predefine what needs to appear as an author. So you can see that I just have my amendment clause appearing here. Okay. So that's most of what I wanted to mention. Just a really quick point as well on using banks of clauses. In case, this has maybe popped up in your head already, but don't feel like you need just one bank of clauses. It might be an idea to have different banks of clauses for different perhaps practice areas, or just divide them up by content that makes sense to the templates that you're working with in your environment. And yes, hopefully that was useful. Nick, back to you.
Thanks, Anna. So to highlight the key points from today's session, firstly, avoid errors of duplicate variables by creating all variables in the top template and using this as your external dictionary in the attached or included templates. And when testing suites, make sure all external dictionaries are refreshed in the sub-templates and that all of the latest versions are uploaded to the site before launching the master template. And finally, when building a clause library, make sure the styles and numbering match the templates you are going to include them in, and make sure you delete any spaces or titles you do not wish to include in your templates. Thanks for your time. We hope you enjoyed this webinar.